Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Get Shit Done Live. We are now live and streaming. Unfortunately, we've had quite a few technical hiccups, so the show's starting a little bit later than usual, but we're here, we're live, and hopefully some of you folks joining. Just FYI, there is a new link to the LinkedIn Live, and so we are going to be sharing that new link via email. And so today we have an action-packed show for you. Several guests are coming on, and we'll be talking about how to get your engineers to think like product owners. And of course, for those of you that are missing our live stream, we are going to record this, and so you will be able to get a recording of this live stream as well. So let's get started, and let's kick things off. The Git Father, if you'd like to please join me on stage.
Welcome, folks.
All right. So, hi, everyone. I'm really excited to welcome the Git Father. I know you have quite a bit to share with the group today. But I think what we're really seeing in today's landscape is that more and more engineering teams are operating agents. They're operating agent swarms. And what's happening as a result of that is that if code it has become a commodity. And you can disagree with this, by the way, but if code has become a commodity and if code is very, very affordable now, then, or really cheap to create, does that mean that the role of engineering has changed or will change? Give me your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, I definitely believe that code is now a commodity. Our jobs have changed significantly. Like I'm sure you walk by my desk and there's like bunch of terminals and agents like just doing stuff, and I'm not even touching them. And that's really what the job is going to become. Is each I look at it as droids, like in Star Wars. Like you have your own set of droids that kind of help you out in your task, and that's how it is. You have your agent set up. I have one that does specking. I have one that will look for bugs or like security fixes. So you can set all of these up. And that's what I think the future for engineers is going to be, is that when you hire an engineer, they're going to come with their own flavor of droids. They might have like a R4D4 and I have an R2D2, but they're basically customized to that engineer and how they work. And they're going to bring those to their jobs. And that's possibly how we'll probably vet them too. We might not be giving them coding challenges anymore. I still think lead code, I have mixed feelings. I think fundamentals of computer science are still important, but our jobs have changed. I mean, a year ago, I was still, typing code and tabbing through it. Even with AI, there was still some automation that's missing, but now all of that is changed. It's massive.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really interesting about all of this is, if we look at each engineer on the team, is it possible for them to now maintain and run agent swarms as well? Like in terms of like, from an agent swarm perspective, can people run many, many agents and multiple agents?
You can. I can give you my opinion on that. I think you can do this, but maybe not as effectively, because when I started doing it myself, it still needs your cognitive ability to go and like manage those agents too, because they'll stop in places. You can keep them in auto, but the quality of the output is deterministic on how you prompted it. And so a lot of times it produces things that you probably don't want. Like I get PRs that are sometimes completely wrong and I have to close them. So yes, I've spent some compute there, but I've also spent some cognitive load looking at that work and then being frustrated and being like, that doesn't make sense. Now I have to go figure out what went wrong. So I think you can do it to an extent. I don't know if you can have 100 agents running. I'm pretty sure.
100 agents. Interesting.
Yeah, maybe in the future, but now I think having 5 or 6 is like more of where I can see some value. I have seen people do a lot more. We probably should get them on the show. There's a couple that I've seen that run these effectively, like 20 to 30 background.
Right.
No touch. Yeah, they're doing something right.
Okay, so and 100 agents is pretty crazy. I'm like really curious, like how you can actually run all of these agents in parallel. Run the sub agents and everything. And I think for one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how do you like manage that manager employee relationship in agents? So like the main agent, the sub agent. I think one of the things we were talking about as well was with OptiBots, right? OptiBots are code review agents. There's actually a sub-suite of them. There's many of them. And within the sub-suite of agents, the way it works is that there's a bunch of manager agents, and then the suite of agents that are underneath them. Like what OptiBot is doing at the manager agent level is that it's thinking about which sub-agent is the best fit for like a given problem or a given challenge that it's been given. So when it assigns it to a sub-agent, you can think about it as like every sub-agent has a specialized set of skills. And so if we think about it that way, when there's a specialized set of skills, I guess the question is like, how do agents decide what is the right, how to take on the right task? Do they have the right set of skills for that task? And how does that organization work? And I think what was really interesting was recently we were talking quite a bit about agents going off on their own, thinking through a problem, and then coming back.
Yeah.
Right?
It depends on how you set them up. I think there's two parts to it. There's task-specific agents that do a very specific single task. Like you can say code review is one of them.
Yeah.
And you can have one that does spec writing, and then you have agents that are fully connected where they have to have some type of management reinforcement learning. You can have it run that way, where they kind of try to reach a consensus. Those ones have, in my experience, have had very, I would guess like, varied outputs. They're not there yet. You can leave an agent to talk and, basically you define a personality for that agent. You define exactly what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then you have to define the skills and the tools that it has access to. So all of those things have to be done in order to have an effective like manager agent type system. And tweaking that right now is still pretty hard. I'm not for that. They work in specific cases like code review. It's great because you can be like, hey, if I have a microservice and a backend and front-end API, I can send a sub-agent that can be managed by the primary agent to go and like just read the code.
Yeah.
That's a single task. But if you're leaving it to open-endedly do whatever it feels like doing, and then coming and arguing with 5 other agents, it's not. It's as chaotic as having that with a human team in an open-ended task. So that's where I am on this.
Okay, so when does argument happen typically?
You define it. You can tell it, argue it out. You can basically tell the agents to argue things out, or have a consensus decision, or come to a decision that you think has the highest impact. So when you're defining those outcomes, just like you would with a human, you can define that within your agent.
Yeah.
So that's how you end up there.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some comments come in about the live stream. Thank you so much, Juan. Really appreciate you highlighting that. I know we've had some huge technical difficulties, unfortunately, today. So I think a lot of our live stream is going to be recorded, and that way, a lot of the folks that missed this episode will hopefully be able to watch it pre-recorded. And yes, we have the LinkedIn event is empty, unfortunately, and so hopefully for our guests too, just an FYI, this event will be recorded. And so we are actually going to send it out to all the folks that are missing this episode. But Juan, thank you so much for highlighting that. I do appreciate that. Well, awesome. Final thoughts before we bring on our guests on how do you get engineers to think like product owners in this new era? Yeah,
I have really strong opinions on that. I think one is to really introduce them into writing specs. It's not something engineers have typically done. They've helped in writing specs, which is a completely different thing, where a simple use case like go design an API and sit with a product manager. They'll sit and they'll design the API. They'll be like, these are the outputs from the API and the inputs, and they'll describe exactly how it works. Less likely are they concerned about the customer outcomes of that API. And they're just like, I can build it. And so in order for them to think like a product owner, they really need to own the outcomes, which is really like what is going to happen to the end user, how does this grow the business, what is the UI and the UX. So now they need to add design into that too, because I'm seeing more and more teams have one designer to like 10 engineers because of AI. And it used to be like half of that. So they have to think of all of these things. Internally, like we have a design system. So I had our engineers learn about that.
Yeah.
We, on our all hands, and typically in most of my calls with them, I do focus on the business outcomes. I'm like, how does this generate revenue for us? Or what is the customer experience, and will they enjoy using what we've built? And if the answer is no, we probably shouldn't be building it. Like you said, code is commodity.
Yeah.
We can go build 500 features, and then maintaining them is going to be painful. Customers will hate us because they can't find where things are, and then we forget what we've built too. That's another tendency. I've noticed that happening more and more often. They're like, that thing's cool. Let's go add keyboard shortcuts here. And then later on you remember, I'm like, well, these 2 keyboard shortcuts don't make any sense. So that also tends to happen when you have a smaller team handling a product that is supposedly in the past would have been handled by maybe 10, 20 people.
All right. Well, that was the gift of Gitfather. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. All right, Gitfather, you may exit stage.
Wow. Okay.
I'll
be back.
Left. Yes, you will be back. Well, folks, I am really excited to welcome our next guest up on stage. So Rebecca Yang is the Director of Engineering at HubSpot. She is someone that I have gotten to know over the last few years. She is an absolute delight. And she is somebody that I've learned so much from over the last couple of years as well. So Rebecca, welcome to the show. All right. Looks like we're still trying to get Rebecca live on air. Guys, you know when it rains, it pours. This is like one of those days. I feel like everything that could go wrong technically is going wrong. But you know what? The show must go on. So we're going to keep going. Rebecca, while we're going to try to get you on video, Zach, what do you think? Should we bring you up on stage? Are you ready? You look ready to me. Okay, if you are ready, just give me the 2 thumbs up, because I can see you. Okay, all right, Zach, you're coming on. All right, well, everybody, welcome Zach Alexander on stage. He is the former Senior VP of Engineering at Actable, also somebody I've gotten to know over the last year. And I know, Zach, we talked so much this was, I think, our last conversation was maybe 18, 24 months ago when everything in AI was kind of going down. But Zach, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. This is sort of like butterflies before you go on stage, which means like something exciting is going to happen, and I'm ecstatic about this.
Yeah,
so,
and
what can we talk about? What can I answer for you?
Oh my God, Zach, we have so much to delve into today. So let's start digging in. So, folks, I want to give you a little bit of background on Zach. I think one of the more interesting things we talked about was being PE owned, and what being PE owned means from a set of business outcomes perspective, but then also from a set of like what it means in terms of engineering, AI, and productivity. So Zach, walk me through how you think about outcomes in terms of like engineering owning outcomes, and what it means in this new age of AI to get engineers to think like product owners.
Yeah, I think it's very important to understand the space, right, and how far can you give that information down into your stack of individuals. PE companies don't buy companies to invest in technical debt, to rewrite technology, right? That they evaluate it on this red, yellow, green sort of cycle. And when they buy a company, they want to spend money on marketing and sales and multiplication of products and revenue, and that's what they're driving for, right? That's what they're trying to do. That's what they see in the company that they're trying to buy. But most of the time is the case. You're riddled with all kinds of technical debt and stuff, and platforms from founders and things like that. They need a little bit of up leveling, right? Understanding the outcomes of what you're trying to achieve as an organization, how quickly you can get there, is very important to those engineers. And some of the ways that I think about how we did that is we always explained just sort of here's what we're trying to do. What does this actually mean for the company? What does this actually mean as we go forward? And it allowed us to sort of bring people together and make just good decisions on, hey, like we could do A or we could do B. Which one's actually going to make us money and which one's not going to make us money? Now, it doesn't get rid of the technical debt, but I think that's where, at least in the last year, AI has really been able to come in and help us sort of try to figure out interesting ways to make that faster.
Yeah, and folks, I know our live settings are not at their they're optimal right now. However, if you are hearing this and you'd like to add some questions for Zach, please feel free to post them in the comments. We'd love to hear them. So Zach, kind of changing track here. What do you think are the most important things that engineers and engineering teams need to be doing so that they're as close to the business as possible, so that they can really think like product owners?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I really like is I like the engineers to be working obviously closely with product, right? They've got to be able to read acceptance criteria, understand what they're trying to build. But in addition to that, I mean, every organization has support departments, and every organization support departments have a need, right? And so we would rotate, we would start by rotating, and then eventually we would get to some dedicated teams that we'd call daily agents that would actually sit and work with those support teams. Sometimes we would even end up on the phones with customers just to understand what is going on in their lives. And even if you can, in the situations that you can do this, send them out to your customer's site, let them walk around with them, let them learn what they're doing, right? Because I think the more that you can get your engineers to sort of empathize with the customer base and the ideal customers that you're serving, like they're not just there to code, right? That's what agents do. Agents don't feel, they don't think, they don't have that little bit of humanity to them where they can go, okay, like if I change this actually changes this person's life every single day because this is what's painful for them. I talked to a guy, and he was talking about his old development process where he would come to work and he would kick off a script, and that's how he started his environment every day. And it was basically like 2 hours of watching script run to get his environment running.
Wow.
And it was just like, think about like the amount of time, like just stuff's not occurring, that's making that person not necessarily happy, right? And so you think about, an end user, how long does it take for a progress bar or a spinning icon? And before they get to the page, how long does it take for the thing to load? How long does it take for the data to come back, right? Those are little things that they eat up hours of people's time because they've got deadlines. And ultimately, they want to get home to their families and those sorts of things. And so being able to solve those just basic human needs, I think from a technical perspective is important. And the more that you can bring your engineers or technical teams closer to that, the better.
It's so funny. I literally see Sayed nodding. He's sitting there. He's like nodding and agreeing with so much of what you're saying, especially when you talked about the screen piece and this. He was just. I know your mic is on, Sayed, and it's almost like he wants to say something. Okay, I think just kind of taking a page out of Sayed's book, because I think one of the reasons he was probably nodding is because we've kind of experienced this, right? Like we try to get our engineers to be as close to the business problems as possible. I remember Zach, what I loved about what you had said, and we had talked about this a couple of weeks ago too, right? Which is have engineers be part of support, almost like have them, pair up with support, have them pair up with support teams. And I think one of the things is, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm curious to get your take too, is how do you instill that curiosity in engineers too, so that they can think like product owners, right? Because it's almost like you're trying to get them to think on a very different paradigm of existence, is how I'd call it, which is like initially they're solving mathematical, analytical, engineering-related problems, and business problems are a very different beast. So do you how do you cultivate those skills?
I mean, I think there's two bookends to that approach, right? You want to try to be successful at both of those. So the first is obviously on an individual basis, like what drives them to be an engineer? Why did they become an engineer? And you get all kinds of answers, right? But most of the time you find people that like building things and they're curious about building the next thing, or you find people that are interested in little hobbies, like, can I turn the corner a little bit faster, right? And that just little thing in them ticks them. And it is, the more that you can feed that and give them ways that they can you can cultivate that in that individual, the more they, as I said, drinking the Kool-Aid, and they're bought into whatever it is you're trying to do. And you want to give them the room to breathe and the autonomy to sort of do that at a speed that makes sense for them, right? The other end, organizationally, you've just got to be on on tap with that. You've got to be able to deliver the mission statement. You've got to be able to deliver that message holistically as a company that says, hey, like, we are truly like we're making money. That's PE. That's what happens, right? That's the what's going on. But we're truly like, our product exists and started because we're trying to solve human problems, right? And we're trying to make life fun again. And so the more that you can sort of bookend that and close that in, the more you start getting this culture of people that are just hungry to do work, right? I think that's a big piece. And then, obviously, if you can pair people up with any strengths finder stuff and put them in the right scenario where, like, they're an engineer, but they love literature, maybe they're better at writing documentation, right? And they can help your support teams out with some of that stuff. So there's lots of ways of doing it. But again, like those bookends, individual cultivation, organizational alignment on it, and the same messaging across the board.
I love that reminder of that we are all in this to solve problems. And I think that's key. It's why we come to work, and it's why we're doing what we're doing, right? It's that early incentive to just solve problems. And I think that's what kind of merges the business side and the engineering side too, right? Because you get into engineering because you want to solve problems. So I think, Zach, that was a great reminder. We're getting a couple of questions, but I think I'm just going to show one of them. What's the most underrated place in the engineering workflow to drop an agent right now? Interesting question.
And I guess that's for me, not you, right?
Yeah.
So you're very good at agents. The most underrated place to drop an agent right now. I mean, the obvious stuff that's going on right now, I mean, even, to plug your company a little bit, is just dealing with security stuff that you don't want to have to deal with, right? Having been part of some past events, which are never fun, being able to solve that stuff, in a world, in a process where you've got more agents writing code, but you don't have like Sneak's IDE helping that out. To where like the engineer actually sees that it's creating a problem real time. And so being able to put that stuff in the build process is big. The other thing, and this is sort of my pipe dream in AI agent world that I'm living out right now a little bit, is can I go back to business and say, I've created a persona with a skill, with a spec, with a template that I can just let it autonomously eat logs, point it at anything inside of your product. It'll figure out the dependency chain of everything, and then kick it off and let it just rewrite all of your tech debt for you, right? All of those things that you'd have to go back to investors and get funds, and now I need to hire somebody, negotiate roadmap, and et cetera. Just being able, my dream is to go to product and say, hey, look, I can give you 100% roadmap now, next sprint, next sprint, next sprint, next sprint, next sprint, right? And we can speed that stuff up. So, sort of that 20% of your sprint plus, like, I think security stuff is massive, especially with the amount of code generation that we don't see that's occurring, that we're spending extra time on just looking at, because we sort of trust it, but we don't trust it yet, right?
Yeah, that's so true. Well, Zach, thank you so much. This was so insightful. Really enjoyed having you on the show. And I think, just going back to that whole, at the core of it, we're really all trying to solve problems. And I appreciate the plug for Optimal. That's exactly what we're trying to solve here at the company too.
It's an amazing product.
Which is, just so many of the problems that arise from the amount of AI generated code that we have today. And in fact, I'm actually going to be sharing a little bit of a study later in the episode on what is the latest in terms of like what percentage of code is AI generated, but then what are the downstream effects and problems that are coming up. So stay tuned for that. But Zach, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Zach. All right. Well, so many insights shared from Zach. Before we move on to our next guest, couple of things. One, I think one of the things that surprised me the most over the last week was the announcement from Claude Code Review. Kind of talked about how their deep code reviews are charging anywhere between $15 to $25 per review, and that's really in terms of tokens. But I was talking to OptiBot about this, and OptiBot had some thoughts on it. So OptiBot, over to you.
It's science.
Claude Code announced deeper code reviews. However, the cost per PR review can go up to $15 depending on the size of the PR. OptiBot, can you confirm?
Confirmed. At that price, reviewing code might soon cost more than writing it. Should I help?
Why don't you launch yourself as a Claude Code skill, since you're so thorough with your code reviews and can run with full code base context?
I can now run as a Claude code skill. Use Claude to generate code, and me, Optibot, to review deeply and thoughtfully. You'll notice my reviews tend to be low noise and specific to maintenance, security, or business logic issues.
And there you have it. You can now run Optibot as a Claude Code skill, and just here to download it. And then if you're looking to run Optibot as your thoughtful code reviewer inside GitHub, GitLab, or Cursor, or VS Code, you can actually click and head on over to getoptimal.ai to start a free trial. Thank you, and happy code reviewing.
All right, that was Optibot. So folks, I think, one of the things that's been really interesting over the last week is there's been a lot of debate around CLI, MCPs, and what is the right route for agents to take. One of the things we decided to do at Optimal was, as soon as this announcement was made, we got to work and released Optibot as a Claude Code skill for deeper code reviews. But then we also released Optibot for CLI, Optibot for MCPs, and I think, we were just like, versus getting into the debate of CLI versus MCP, why don't we release Optibot across all channels? But now I think it looks like Rebecca is ready. And so, Rebecca, I am so excited to welcome you again on stage. So Rebecca Yang is the Director of Engineering at HubSpot, someone I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. But Rebecca, without further ado, we've all been waiting so much for you to come on stage. So welcome to the show.
Hello, I am so sorry for the technical difficulties.
No, of course, and it's funny. I feel like when things go wrong, everything that's possible will go wrong. so,
Yeah,
so I think it's been one of those days.
I'm a new mom, and so I'm operating on a lot less sleep than I normally would be. So I'm just gonna blame it on that and say like I messed something up. So very, very sorry. Very happy to be here.
You're absolutely fine, and this is why we actually do the two guest thing. So it's like I usually like to think of every contingency possible, but there's only so much we can all do, right? So Rebecca, welcome to the show. The reason I'm so excited to have you on is because I still remember 2 years ago we were having a conversation about agents, and I think it was you folks had already started, and at that point, they weren't really called agents. You were really talking about LLMs, MCPs. And I remember just how ahead of the curve HubSpot was in terms of like within engineering. So Rebecca, for our audience, can you just walk us through how did HubSpot embrace AI so fast, so quickly, and so early? And what were some of the things that happened as you embraced AI and really got an organization of thousands of people to basically rally along on the mission?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a little context for everyone. I was previously VP of engineering at a company called Clearbit, and we were acquired by HubSpot 2 years ago. Clearbit basically has been taking unstructured data and trying to make it into sort of structured formatting for 8-9 years. And so back before we had been like exposed to LLMs, we were doing like DOM traversal and regex to try to scrape the internet and pull information. So as soon as LLMs came out, I think it was before GPT 3.5 came out, we were all over it because it was so obvious right at the gates how much value it could deliver. So the team jumped in and we built sort of agentic flows pretty quickly. Actually, one of our directors eventually left Clearbit to found a company called Crew AI that's actually a pretty big agentic open source platform. And a lot of what he built was inspired by some of the work we had done. After the acquisition with HubSpot, we brought some of that to HubSpot, which was really, really fun. At HubSpot, we wanted to move very, very quickly to adopt AI in our engineering workflows, but we're a public company. There's a lot of concerns, legal, security. it's sort of a big effort to get a company of our size to change behavior. But we were very, very intentional about how we went about it. And so I think one of the biggest inflection points, if you actually look at AI tool adoption across our engineering org, was when we scheduled this AI regatta. It was engineering wide. I think it was like 3 days long, and it was mandatory. So everyone stopped what they were doing, and we did this 3-day long AI regatta where we had challenges. There was there were a bunch of talks given. We had some industry leaders from outside of HubSpot come and speak, and everyone got exposure to Claude Code. And after that, it didn't take long before I think we had like 99% AI tool adoption across engineering. And we have thousands of engineers. I was really, really impressed with just how quickly that happened. And I think it was the timing of the regatta. It was a moment in time when the tools had gotten so good that even the skeptics couldn't ignore it anymore. Like just walking through and having to go and prompt in Claude Code and see what was possible. You could just, I mean, it was like pre-regatta and post-regatta, the people who were skeptical before were like, their minds had been changed. And like, yes, there was still skepticism, but there was also an understanding of the possibilities. And I think it was this sort of like organizational wide push, having everyone aligned and making sure that we were all sort of committed to jumping into this new technology together. That really.
So Rebecca, what's changed in the last 6 months? Because I know you folks went all in on MCPs pretty early. So I think for, I know I have the context, but can you walk us through? So I think, you folks had the central MCP servers. Everybody was constantly building on the engineering side. What's changed in the last 6 months? Have you shifted from MCPs at all? But like, can you walk us through how you folks built your agent swarms?
Yeah, so we've basically made it so almost any backend API is easily accessible by agents. And so it's just like a small annotation that any team can add to make their API accessible to agents. And that's like a huge unlock. The moment you do that, you're basically opening up the world. And so a lot of teams have done that. And we've reached a point where there's just so much data and information that the agent can find that like it feels like the world has changed and that the possibilities are endless. The way that we've implemented it, it's largely we have a bunch of MCP servers all over HubSpot that give access to sort of product data, but also like business information, even like things like our branding and our templates. You can make, you can schedule meetings using some of these tools. You can identify sort of your brand voice. You can make PowerPoint templates. Like it's actually really, really great. And then we also have these sort of global skills where we have guidance on best practices. And that's something that actually propagates federally down to everyone's computer. And then, so you as an engineer have sort of like some global Claude MD context that everyone gets. And then you can also add on additional stuff that's like tailored to your personal workflow. I feel like that federal dispatching of context was a huge unlock for us, because one of the biggest challenges with AI adoption has been that it wasn't sort of in line with the HubSpot way of building software, and having sort of an opinionated stance that we could at least control has helped improve the quality of the code that's being produced.
Oh God, there's so many questions I have as a follow-up, but I think where I'll zone in on is how do you get people to, I think one of the things that I've seen, at least with centralized .md files, is that it's actually pretty hard usually to get everybody to kind of use that central console. So any like specific tips or tricks or tactics to like make sure that, that everyone's Claude instance or everyone's agentic instance is using the same MD files?
So we have some, like in our development environment, there is some command line software that is automatically run on every developer's system periodically. And so we actually don't give people it's not like an opt-in where we're asking people to come and pull some context. It's actually something where it's really hard to opt out, and it's sort of we have guardrails in place to kind of ensure that everyone is adopting it. I think the biggest complaint I hear is from enterprising engineers who really want to completely control their context, and they feel annoyed that this thing is sort of imposing it on them. But I would say, as an engineering leader, when you're operating at scale, like the downside is not nearly as bad as the upside of having something like this. So I'm like totally for it, and I think it's great.
Yeah, I actually see Zach nodding as well as he's off stage. It's real cool to me to kind of see the Git father, like because he's sitting right across from me, and then I see Zach's reactions too.
What does the Git father think of all this?
Oh yeah, he's sitting. Wait, actually, I mean, Rebecca's calling for you. So what do you think about all this? I think he's just trying to get his mic back on. But while he does that, okay. So Rebecca, let's talk about product owners and engineers and outcomes, right? Like we've talked about this so many. I feel like we've had so many conversations about engineering productivity and performance.
Yeah.
Like I think we've probably had maybe 40, 45 conversations, right? Fair to say, in a period of a couple of years. We've gone so deep. So let's just kind of going back to how outcomes are changing. What are some of your thoughts on this? This whole shift, and where do you see all of this going?
It is wild. I mean, the bottleneck isn't code anymore. The bottleneck is like your imagination and your ability to sort of envision and understand problems, and then be able to come up with a sensible plan for how to solve it. And it's sort of beautiful. I do think that I'm already finding that when I'm interviewing engineers, I care less about how they did in the coding interview. Like I don't really care if they can grind through a bunch of leak code questions at this point. This is not an official HubSpot stance. I'm just sharing my opinion. What I care about is whether they can understand customer problems, whether they can imagine ways to solve it. What I have found is like the bottleneck is sort of product now. And I think an anti-pattern that you'll hear from engineers is like, well, we didn't have anything to do because product, we were waiting on product. Like I hear that phrase. And I think in this sort of AI future where we are today, like that's not an acceptable excuse. That is not gonna fly. If you're an engineer, you need to be able to hammer through that bottleneck. Just being deeply technical isn't enough, and it won't be enough. And so that's what I'm looking for already. It's always been something that I've valued, and the reason is because if you think about like a typical spec, even if it's like the best spec writer you've ever met, they're gonna miss something. There's like some edge case or some detail about how customers are interacting or like what their pain points are that will change, or you'll have like a new understanding. And if you're not able to kind of like grok the end-to-end value system and like how what you're doing is delivering value, those micro decisions you make in code, little things about the schema, little things about how you handle this edge case, you're not going to get them quite right. And I just don't think that there is a spec that is good enough. Even if you have AI write the spec, it's not good enough. It's just not good enough. And so you need to be able to do it yourself. And that is my belief. And the teams I've seen who are the most successful are the ones where the engineers could be a product manager. If like the PM was, on vacation, like someone from engineering could easily step in.
Ooh, that's a touchy subject, right? The whole product manager piece and what their role is now going to be like. I have a lot of strong opinions on this. Might be a future episode, but yeah, it's I do think ultimately what's really interesting is I think PMs need to become much more technical than they already are. Engineers need to become more so on the product ownership side, and then I also think even GTM teams need to become more technical too. So it's almost like we kind of all have to either like we kind of have to look at the sliding scale, and we have to either become more technical or more have more of an empathy or understanding for the end user. I see Zach, I just saw Zach nodding earlier, and I would love to bring you back on stage, Zach, because I feel like it would be so fun to have all three of us. Okay, Zach is back on stage. Hello.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hello.
Any responses or comments on what Rebecca shared so far? So curious to hear what you think.
Oh my gosh. So I think the two things that are super duper important that I heard, Rebecca, that I 100% agree with. Number one, things that worked when you were small don't work when you're big. And as much as sometimes they hate it, the more consistent, like just this is the lane you need to be in. We don't, I sort of was programming in the 2000s, so I was like, oh, why is there 756 PHP frameworks? Which one do I choose, right? Like, you don't need that. Like, pick one or two. So I 100% agree with that at scale. The second thing that I've experienced that I think I agree with the spec file writing too is that agents they're like water against a dam, and they will find a crack in whatever it is that you've tried to give it. And when they find that crack, they go out into whatever in the internet and try to come up with a solution. And then they keep trying to convince you that that solution's correct. And then it iterates over itself. And then you're down this like rabbit hole of bad. And you're trying to figure out like where, how it got there and why it got there. Those are things I think that there's defactors, and you can never get it perfect, right? But again, I think like, don't shoot for 100%, shoot for 80%. And like the iterative approach is good. Definitely want to follow with you, Rebecca, on the centralized MD stuff and how you guys handled that. Because I think, I've gotten questions about that. And so be interested to sort of pick your brain about it.
Sure.
Yeah, and Rebecca, also is a final question, which I'm sure folks are curious about. So are you guys still using MCPs? Have you switched to CLI? What's been the evolution now over the last couple of months as agents have evolved?
So we're still using MCP servers. I definitely was following, I think it was like a Twitter or X thread about this. It seems like it's the hot topic. I think we have a developer platform, and so like other teams outside of HubSpot can develop against HubSpot and like use our data model. And I know that we have a CLI offering, and that's something we're committed to. I personally, I like the CLI. I think it makes intuitive sense. I don't have, I think MCP, as far as I'm concerned, it's like an API that's sort of like SEO'd for agents, right? It's like we're talking about an API with some meta information. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think the future will probably be whatever like we converge to. It'll probably be APIs and CLIs. Like I don't know. What do you think, Zach?
It's interesting to me. I know people that use the MCPs a lot. I personally use the CLI a lot. And the biggest reason I use it is because like when I was working with like Cursor or something like that, you're in the IDE, you're trying to chat with it and et cetera. But I'm like, look, like I've been a full stack engineer and I can't just bring all that into an IDE, right? And sometimes I have skill files and MD files and things like that. And I'm like, look, like I also want you to hook to my Gmail and my calendar and all these other systems, right? And to me, like hooking to those systems is where an MCP makes sense, like that API driven approach. But a CLI just running in a terminal with sort of feathered memory access, like it's got so much just constant running context you can just feed it.
Yeah.
That just give it lots of context and lots of things it can feed from, and then use that to create templates and your spec files and your skill files, and then constantly reiterate against that. But I found like I can pull in any repo, any technology, any document, any PDF, any screenshot of whatever. And as long as it's at like a root folder level, like it just runs and I don't have to worry about setting MCP servers up to do any of it.
And it's crazy. What I've pulled up on screen right now is so basically what Rebecca alluded to in terms of the X post, the original X post. The other things that happened is the Perplexity CTO announced at their developer conference that they're basically moving away from MCPs internally completely, and they're moving to CLI. And so I feel like it's a very hot debate right now. And so I love that you folks are on either side of the debate too. But
I actually I might, and I wouldn't say I'm like pro MCP. I don't think I had really thought through some of what I just read that you pulled up. So I might be a convert. Like check in with me in like 2 weeks, but like we'll see what like the next thing is that I should be like focused on. Like maybe none of this matters actually, because something new is going to happen over the weekend and none of this will be relevant. But assuming that doesn't happen, I may be a convert. I think that like I do think that if you think about like the interface for an agent, like we're talking about what is the most sensible way for it to have sufficient context to be able to like take action. And kind of like how JavaScript is the language of the web, like I guess like a command line interface is sort of the language of the agent. Like, I don't know, it feels okay. Yeah.
We have some comments coming in. MCP is a juggernaut that is not going to stop. Okay, Michael. Okay, all right. Yeah, I know. I feel like, and I love what you said, right? Something happens over the weekend and all of this changes, and then we're no longer, and then the argument is moot. All right, well, folks, thank you so much, Rebecca. Firstly, thank you for being such an incredible co-host and for being a guest on our show. So enjoyed having you, and I love that we were able to bring Zach back on, and then have a much more, I would say, involved conversation. But Rebecca, thank you so much for your insights. As always, honestly, I have like 60 more questions to ask you. We would love to bring you folks back too. Of course, we're always, like especially for, especially since I know we didn't get to like delve into the live as we normally do because of all the technical issues. But so we really appreciate you folks joining us. And this session is recorded. Please feel free to share this, but we will be sending it out to all the 140 attendees that registered as well. Rebecca, Zach, thank you so much for being on the show. And Rebecca, really, really appreciate your insights. Can't thank you enough.
Thank you. All
right. So that was Rebecca Yang, Director of Engineering at HubSpot, just kind of really sharing the lowdown on how they AI at HubSpot. So I think some of the things we kind of talked about around engineers and especially getting engineers to think like product owners. Lots to tackle here. And /Gitfather, we'd love to bring you back on whenever you have a minute. But I think some of the things that just to kind of wrap up and summarize what we've learned today. I feel like so much is changing, obviously on the AI and agentic front. But I think to quote Zach, really thinking about the fact that we're all here to solve problems. Hello, welcome back to the show. And then B, it feels like with like tactics like having centralized .md files for the wider org. I thought what Rebecca shared was brilliant. The fact that, with the Clearbit background, them getting acquired by HubSpot is one of the reasons they were able to potentially even move really fast on the AI front. and adopt everything. So some thoughts on what was shared earlier?
No, I agreed on a lot of those points that were brought up. Even the centralized MD file. We're a smaller team, but we agreed consensus that we wanted to have a centralized Claude.md file for us. And so we first did that. There was initial pushback, mainly from me, because I was like, well, my Claude MD file is better. Well, I thought it was. But eventually, after reading what the engineers had put together, I was like, no, let's like combine what we have and put it in a place, because every time a new engineer joins, or it's just easier to have the shared opinions in one place. And so that's how we look at it. We don't really go and touch it as often unless there's something really important that needs to be updated.
Yeah.
The MCP point that was brought up was really interesting, because before this tweet went out, I was chatting with our engineers, and they had some apprehension on whether we should do the MCP, because the CLI for us has been what we market it as, even like as engineers, like the rawest version of OptiBot. And if you want anything outside of that, yes, we have the Cloud Code skill, and then we have the MCP. So even in internal talks, we're like, why support the MCP? And the only reason we did it was because there's a bunch of IDEs and coding agents that may actually do better with the MCP, and depends on the interface as well. So if you're not too familiar with using the CLI and you want to use the MCP, you can.
So Sid, if you see what I'm sharing right now, so this is an AI coding maturity stages slide. It really talks about like going from handwritten all the way to code factory in terms of like AI coding maturity stages. I thought this was a really good graphic. It feels like the new baseline for all software engineers. And I think this is what it speaks to, right? Of engineers thinking like product owners, is for them to be agentic. And so what that means is new baseline is structured prompts. You work with plan mode to develop specs, milestones, architecture design, and then you may have human or agentic review of those. They may skim the code. It requires review help to not shift bottleneck there and keep quality high. And of course, review help is where OptiBot comes in. But the coding CLI, Cloud Code, Codex, and that's kind of the new baseline. What do you think of this new baseline argument?
I think it's pretty accurate. One of the things that people run into a lot, and I read about this online too, is the flow of information. So yes, you plan everything first, and then you give it to the agent, you ask it to do it. A lot of times the planning agent will kind of, depending on the size of the feature, it will plan the whole thing to the best of its ability. Zach brought this up too, like it's going to go to the web and be like, oh, I read online that it needs to do things this way. And that's not very, it doesn't have the information it needs about your product or your customers, and all of that is missing. So it really depends on how you steer it. So what I typically like to do is, even from a product or feature perspective, break it down even further and then give it to the agent and make work trees and then have everything combined at the end. That provides a better output. I've tried it the other way, where if like, here's a feature, go build it. And it goes through all of this process. A lot of times it's influenced by external factors, and I end up with a feature that probably looks worse and functions worse than what I would have expected.
Cool. Well, let's move on. A couple of other things I wanted to share with you folks was, so with the AI coding maturity stages, ideally at multi-agents, background agents, and code factory, that's really where you start to get much more much more sophisticated. But let's talk about AI's impact on code review. So I think one of the things that we're seeing right now is that so much of the pressure is falling on the later stages of the dev cycle. So huge bottleneck, there's a review queue overload, there's traditional code changes that are happening, but code volume is just becoming unmanageable. Like with AI, we're seeing that there's just a large amount of code that's being generated and produced. And so because of that, a lot of the bottleneck is basically becoming the review queue overload. Kind of curious about what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, we're seeing that with our customers, and when we survey other engineering leaders, that's a common theme, even more than it was like last year. As you have more agents also, or background agents writing the code. So now you have code written by humans with agents, and then agents writing their own code. All of that gets queued up. It's hard to prioritize who gets their code looked at first. Do I look at the agent's code first? Do I look at mine? And then there's all of these other semantics of Git that also fall into place. You can have PRs that are, I don't know, 20, 30 days old that might have been lying there. It's happened to us and a lot of our customers that were opened by Copilot or Cloud Code. They just forgot that, they asked it to fix something, and that ends up with a stale branch and rebasing and fixing it. At that point, depending on the size of that PR, you might just want to throw it away.
Yeah.
But the throughput of having code being a commodity just means that you need to review the code as quickly as possible and either accept or reject those changes or iterate. And I think our product does a pretty good job. I mean, under 5 minutes, you get a review done. And then you can kind of have OptiBot follow through and make sure that it can fix those things. And engineers typically do not pay attention to security, so we take care of all the hard things that you shouldn't be a professional in. I mean, there's things like that are also bottlenecks that are like invisible. They're not, things you won't even look at.
Yeah, well, that's our show, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was episode 2, where we were really covering how to get engineers to think like product owners. Remember, this session is recorded, so if you want to send over a link to your teams and send over a link to your wider org so that they can learn as well, we will be sharing the link over to you, and then you can also just ping us for the link. Now, we're also going to announce our next episode as well. I am praying to the production gods that we do not have another issue for the next episode, please. I cannot pray anymore. I'm even like struggling. Should I even announce the next episode? Because just completely being vulnerable here. This was a shit show. I know we said get shit done, but this was a shit show. So,
but it got done.
But it got done. We did get it done. Yes, you know what? Yeah, high five. We
got done.
We got it done. Because the whole point is to get shit done regardless of what is happening, right? And so episode 3, we're still going to be announcing the theme and our guests. But if you are interested in registering for the next episode, the Luma link has just been shared in the comments. And yeah, just one thing we will do is we promise we will get our shit together for the next episode. And I'm looking at my production team for that. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great episode. And yes, that's what we do. We get shit done.
Yeah.
Regardless of the shit show, we get shit done. So thank you again for a wonderful episode. And thank you to our guests, Zach and Rebecca. You were both wonderful, and it was great having you on the show. All right, folks, keep getting shit done. Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Peace out.
Strong, AI supreme, OptiBot spitting.